Tēnā koutou katoa. Good afternoon and welcome everyone. My name is Susie Ralston. I'm the Chief Operating Officer at Lincoln University, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to today's VIBE series, Global Agriculture and Supply Chains. The VIBE series is all about bringing people together to explore issues shaping the future of our land-based sectors. It provides a space for informed discussion, diverse perspectives and meaningful connections between industry, researchers, policymakers and the wider community. Today's topic is particularly timely. New Zealand's agricultural economy is deeply connected to global markets, and the decisions made by farmers, exporters, businesses and governments here are increasingly influenced by events occurring elsewhere in the world. Trade relationships, supply chain disruptions, changing consumer expectations, sustainability requirements and geopolitical shifts are all reshaping the landscape in which our primary industry operates. Understanding these forces and how New Zealand can contribute to compete, adapt and thrive within them is critical for the future success of our food and fibre sectors. To help set the scene from a Lincoln University perspective, I am pleased to introduce Professor Alan Ringwood. Alan is Professor of Agricultural Economics at Lincoln University, and his research focuses on agricultural trade policy, innovation within agri-food systems and the performance of agricultural value chains. His work spans both New Zealand and international contexts, examining how both policy, technology and innovation influence the sustainability and competitiveness of food production systems. Alan will provide a brief overview of the work underway at Lincoln University and how it connects to today's discussion. Please join me in welcoming Professor Alan Ringwood.
Yes, I had a sort of half invitation to speak when Katie asked me. She said, well, we wanted to get John Saunders to talk about the trade modelling we're doing, but he was speaking last week. And then we wanted Mark Wilson to talk about supply chains, but he's speaking next week. What about you? Was the problem. So I'm not proud I'll speak anywhere. So I kind of feel I'm a bit like the advertorial before the main event today. So you have to sit here while we sell Lincoln University to you for 5 minutes before you actually get to the crux of what we're after today. So I just really want to talk a little bit about our capability in this area of global agriculture and supply chain. One of the things now that we're very proud of promoting ourselves is that we are probably the largest group of researchers working in agribusiness in Australasia. We keep saying this, no one's challenged us yet, so we're going to keep saying it until someone says, well, actually. And we had a huge breadth and depth of expertise in the area of agriculture and food systems and supply chains research, and just highlighted some of the areas here. The global value chains of trade, agribusiness and food systems, supply chain management, economic industry, and policy impacts. So we have a very strong capability to work in this area, and I'm sure when Matt raises many of the challenges in our supply chains, we've got the ability to look and work at that. And our work sort of encompasses a whole range of things from supply chains, but also the global value chains and the work of our former AERU, which is now being sort of folded into our faculty of business and commerce. The work of sort of matrices, there's critical international issues affecting New Zealand agriculture, the compass of values, thinking about how we can add value for our sector and work, of course, there as well. I just want to talk a little bit about our modelling capability. I guess it comes back to me as an economist and talking about models. But we have, when we're thinking about the impact of these changing environments globally on us, the Lincoln Trade Environmental Model is a really useful tool for us to be able to understand the changes that are going on. And that's a global partial equilibrium model. Includes 26 commodities and 22 regions from across the world. So this gives us a really good capacity to be able to understand issues such as Trump's tariffs, climate change, these things on how trade and their climate implications on New Zealand. And some recent work that they've done, for example, was evaluating the economic impacts of climate change on the New Zealand dairy sector by modelling what's happening in New Zealand, but then also linking that to how climate change is going to affect global agriculture and relationships between the two. But the other thing I think is important for us in the New Zealand context is how we take these global changes and global shifts, drivers and factors that are affecting us, and bring that down to what does that mean for agriculture in New Zealand. And we've also got that capability to take, I guess, the model of global shifts and changes and what's happening to prices, quantities there, but then to think about how these changing scenarios, how these futures actually begin to affect our agriculture. So we can go from that global changes down to national. We have models, for example, the program model, which has understand land use decision making farm level across New Zealand, and also the integrated impact assessment model, which then helps us think about the impact of those changes in land use on the wider economy in terms of multiplier effects, etc. So this gives us a strong capability to be able to model these global shocks and then think about how that affects New Zealand. Of course, we can also go further down. So yes, this is, for example, work we did for, shouldn't be promoting other banks today, but this is work for NSB. I thought I'd mention it to get some healthy competition going, highlighting the work we did here. Still being cited last week, actually, in field days. The $10 billion number came out of that as reason for the funding of flexibility. So Matt, if you want value for money, you know, we need to come to here. But we can also then bring this down from global to national, but even to local. So this is work we've been doing recently for Selwyn District Council, again, thinking about the future of the food and fibre sector in Selwyn, and under possible scenarios such as reducing greenhouse gas, reducing dairy production, increasing dairy production for export intensity, etc. So we can use these models to help us understand, again, potential changes at the global level, how they come down to. So that's a very quick overview of the sorts of work we're doing. Just trying to highlight some of our capacity and capability. So thank you for sitting through the tutorial. And now I think get to the main part of the day. Our final plug here for the Centre of Excellence Transforming Agribusiness. We're still going, still looking at these key areas which all, I think, live in certain situations. So thank you.
Some really pertinent things you touched on in that rapid fire advertisement for existing commerce, but you know, you touched on climate change, you know, global supply chain shocks, and also technology and the pressure side. Then what our keynote speaker has to say about some of those topics. So it's now my pleasure to introduce our keynote speaker, Matt Dilly from ANZ. Matt is an agricultural economist also who leads ANZ's analysis of New Zealand's agricultural sector and authors the bank's well-regarded agri-focus and some other research, other related research publications. Prior to joining ANZ, Matt spent more than a decade working at Aotearoa and from MPI as an agricultural economist, giving him really deep experience across virtually every facet of New Zealand's agricultural sector. Through his work, Matt has developed a deep understanding of economic forces shaping primary industries, commodity markets and trade flows through farm profitability, global demand and policy settings. Today, Matt will share some insights into the trends influencing global agricultural supply chains, the opportunities and challenges facing New Zealand's producers and exporters, and how innovation, finance, and strategic decision-making can help build resilience in an increasingly complex global environment. Please join me in giving a
yeah, really happy to be here, talk to you guys about what's going on, about, I guess, an agricultural economist's view of what's going on in supply chains at the moment and how that's kind of working through to the work that you all are doing. So, of course, I'm going to start with some actual science. This is the social scientist cosplaying as a real scientist, but it makes sense in a minute. when an earthquake happens, you've got different shock waves that travel at different speeds and hit you at different times. You've got the P waves that come right away. Maybe that's the one that makes dogs bark and it's act strangely. Then you've got the S waves, and then sometime later you've got the tsunami waves coming your way. Maybe they'll be big, maybe they won't. But there is a bit of a lag between the impulse and what's coming next. So even though the original event might not be over, you'll still feel the effects of it sometime afterward. Why did I bring that up? Good question. Yeah, a lot of strange things have happened over just the past couple of years. This is a brief but recent history of recent supply chain shipping disruptions, including that one ridiculous time when a ship got stuck in the Suez Canal. You can see the drought in Panama there on the light blue line, and of course the Israel-Hamas war that imperiled ships traveling through the Suez Canal, through the Red Sea, and then of course most recently the Gaza war. So this is, and these are just kind of the most obvious situations that have happened in recent times about the sorts of disruptions that can happen in global supply chains. So again, much like an earthquake, those don't necessarily hit right away. So in hindsight, it would have been nice had I superimposed these charts over each other. Too many lines of different colors. So what we've got here is, it was about a 6-month lag between when that ship the Ever Given got stuck in the Suez Canal and when supply chain disruption and global shipping rates hit their peak in late 2021. Counterintuitively, the impact of the Suez Canal losing half of its traffic, somehow that didn't really cause the same amount of chaos that we saw previously. And of course, the pre-existing conditions would have been a big factor there. And then we've got what's happened over the past couple of months. So the war started in late February, and it took about 6 weeks or so for some of these indicators to really start taking off. Of the shipping disruption index, the supply chain pressure index, and the dry goods, which is dry goods like logs and wheat, whereas the tanker index affects them pretty quick. So again, that's just another illustration of some of those lags, and as those different shock waves travel through the global economy, the shores, and what's coming up next, and some of that's already happening. Of course, we've got the oil prices, fuel prices rise almost right away. The fertilizer companies, especially now with the Ravensdown, are as slow and as reluctant as they possibly could be to increase their fertilizer prices. They are higher than what they were they're about 30 to 45% higher than what they were pre-conflict. And then the next round is inflation and shipping disruption. So we are starting to see higher shipping rates out of New Zealand, but so far not a lot of really bad congestion like what we saw in 2021 and 2022. So there's a saying in agriculture, in U.S. grain markets, that short crops have long tails. This kind of applies to oil in this context as well. So what that means is short crop, there's a drought, there's a frost, there's something that happens, and the price of wheat, beans, or maize skyrocket. And that's a signal to the market that, hey, we need to ration demand so that we can make it through to the next harvest. That's the long tail, as supply and demand sort of finely tunes and adjusts the price to, ideally, you get through your last bushel of rice or wheat right before the next harvest kicks in and replenishes supply. So that's what that's trying to do. And in a way, That's what the oil market's been doing over the past couple of months. So even though the strait has remained closed, there has been some sort of a peace agreement agreed. We don't know what's in it. We don't know whether it'll stick. But even if the strait remains closed, I think we've seen the worst of the highest oil prices for this particular shock. So there will be another shock that resets the whole. But the markets have adjusted these supply chains. So US is producing more, China's importing less, inventories are getting drawn down, which coincidentally, there was quite a bit of oil inventory around in the world. So again, short crops have long tails. We're just drifting down here as supply and demand each other, moderate each other until something changes. So there are some folks in our economics group that are pretty convinced that the markets are crazy and that the strait's still closed. We're still down a couple of million or billion dollars, million or billion barrels a day, and that the markets are just naive for believing Trump. But markets aren't naive; they're adjusting, they're responding. So that's where we're at the moment. And with the strait opening further, and then the other thing it's worth pointing out is is the divergence. It used to not matter really when you talked about the price of oil. It's the price of oil. It doesn't matter where it is, the way it is. But all of a sudden, that mattered a lot. So the Middle Eastern oil prices skyrocketed. Well, just on the outside of the strait, collapsed on the inside of the strait because they couldn't get out. And in fact, right now, a lot of the Middle Eastern oil is cheaper than the North Sea or the West Texas Intermediate oil prices because there's a lot of it out there that hasn't been able to get out. That's now ready to get out. So it's if anything, that'll be good for New Zealand because that's the mission that we've. So I should have also started off by saying I love being interrupted. It sounds super sarcastic, but it's really not. Try not to be sarcastic. But so if you have any questions about any of this stuff, just yell it out, especially if I'm taking an awkward pause while I figure out what to say next. So there was a while, not that long ago, that fertilizer prices might double for the coming season. And yeah, the urea prices are up 30 to 45% from the big companies right now. But the global prices that will eventually flow through to New Zealand markets, they did have a big run up, but they're almost back to where they were pre-conflict. It's still not cheap, especially with cheaper New Zealand, not with the low New Zealand dollar. But it's what we're seeing through the oil markets and fertilizer markets is this effectively puts like a cap on the worst case scenario in terms of cost inflation. So fertilizer fuel vehicles is maybe around 12% of cost of production, plus or minus, depends on your sector. But the prices aren't going to double for the coming season. So 5% cost inflation, that's something that we can manage as a country. And of course, some sectors are in a much better position than others to deal with 5% higher costs. So again, the starting point matters, just like with the Trump tariffs last year. The starting point matters. Dairy and meat doing awesome. Okay, and you want to throw a few extra tariffs on, we can deal with that. And arable and wine, those are sectors that struggling with that because they were struggling going into those situations. So we learned a lot in 2021, 2022. This is inventory data, inventory value data from Stats New Zealand, inflation adjusted. We switched from just in time to just in case in 21, 22. because that was the right thing to do. It was common sense. Why we were crazy to have lean supply chains prior to that, and why wouldn't we want that resilience, especially for strategic materials, strategic supply chains, and that's what we did. This is just New Zealand, but this happened globally. Built up inventories to manage these supply chain risks. It's really easy to do when money was free. And then money stopped being free very suddenly. And those inventories turned from a strategic asset to albatross, especially with consumer demand going down. And so as quickly as we learned that lesson, we learned it. And here we are again, and now we're learning new lessons. We're learning different lessons, and heard a lot, in the past days or weeks. Maybe this will trigger decarbonization, these high oil prices. And will encourage. Maybe this will encourage more onshoring of energy sources, and reinvigorate offshore oil and gas exploration in New Zealand or anywhere else. We need to be energy independent, and to an extent we do. But that does come at a cost. There is a cost trade-off between resilience and efficiency. If you're willing to pay for it, or if someone's willing to pay for it, that's fine. So so that's the lesson that we're learning right now in 2026. So the question is, how thoroughly will we learn that, and then how when the price of oil goes down to 50 or 60 bucks, and maybe the folks that bought an EV over the past 2 months will keep their EV. The folks that bought a bicycle, maybe the bicycle start getting a little bit of rust. I know I bought a caravan when during the lockdown when we couldn't travel overseas, and it's not getting a lot of use right now. So but I didn't buy a bike. I didn't. Oh, crap, I want to. So that's the question. Is some folks, some countries, will look at this and say this is a lesson to be learned. We need to be energy independent. We need a strategy for energy prices or oil and gas, or switch to electrification. And others will say, all right, well, let's look at the economics, and at some point the economics, went out. So this is pretty much my last slide. So try to keep it a little bit short so we can have a bit more conversation. Not getting nearly as many interruptions as I was hoping, frankly. But there are a few slow-moving shockwaves still to come. Inflation is not going to be as bad as we thought. In fact, just today we got a little bit of food price data coming out from Stats New Zealand. It wasn't as bad as we thought it would be. The fuel prices are down a little bit as well from some of that stuff that Stats published. We've lowered our inflation forecast. It was going to peak this quarter, the Q2, or to the end of this month. We did think it was going to peak at around 4.4%. Now we're thinking 4.1%. And so there's still going to be a long tail as we get through the second half of the year. But things aren't looking quite as bad as they were 2 months ago as these waves roll through. Now we're still going to see higher interest rates. Although the inflation forecast is lower, that's still well outside some boundary that the Reserve Bank might inflation in. And they were probably going to increase anyways towards the end of 26. So all we've done is, in our forecast, we just brought that forward a few months to sort of deal with this inflation shock. And what that does is it keeps keeps inflation in check, so we don't get a situation like 2022. So the good news from all of that is farm costs are going to stay 5% where they are. currently, again pending another U.S. administration executive action for Truth Social emanation. And interest rates, maybe they're not going to be surprised quite as high as initially thought, but yeah, they'll still need to at least go up through the end of this year to get the OCR to what we call neutral territory. So that's where the roughly around 3% OCR from 2.25 currently. That's the Goldilocks number that's in theory neither inflationary nor contractionary. So kind of the best of both worlds, but it's easier said than done, especially when events keep happening in the world. But the world is getting less certain, so this is kind of what we have to deal with going forward. Maybe with a quote. This was from an academic in Canada called Bethlehem Schmiel, and in the context, it was 2015, and everyone was really concerned about the falling price of oil. So it was going from 120 a barrel down to about 60 a barrel, and everyone was concerned about what the global growth, which sounds really backwards, doesn't it? Everyone's really upset about how prices are at 80 right now, and they were over 100 a few months ago. We are living through yet another down chapter of a prolonged, undulating saga. What is the best thing to do? Old world herbalists and modern promoters of chamomile tea agree. The golden-hued beverage has a mild sedative effect. It eases anxiety and insomnia, and it leaves a soothing aftertaste. I recommend increased doses of this classic tisane with a touch of honey, as long as the current oil price fall lasts. By the time the trend inevitably reverses itself, your drinking of chamomile tea might become a new and beneficial habit, ready to ease the anxiety brought on by the rising prices. So, yeah, without questions, have a chat.
I just had a quick one. Does a lot of this modelling sort of reverse itself if this ceasefire deal doesn't really happen in the near term, or would you still consider that it will happen eventually? It's just a matter of time. So that's the question.
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, looking at what was happening prior to the ceasefire, you could say maybe to some degree that oil markets and everything else were just kind of, assured that this time Trump was serious about that ceasefire agreement, about that peace agreement. Looking at the evidence, even if the strait remains closed, it'd be hard to see the oil prices spiking up suddenly, without some other sort of impulse in the market. And if we're going to start to run out of oil, then at that point we would be doing it gradually, not suddenly, and people would be able to adjust to that. It's these sudden shocks that require that, alarm clock in the morning, or something orderly.
A few certain questions that are actually quite intriguing. So for some producers, what we see.
Yeah, well, there's some pretty big swings in commodity cycles right now. But over the medium term, we're absolutely on trend. I'm just going to flick slides forward and just hope that I didn't delete the slide that I'm trying to talk about. No. Okay. Well, the new food pyramid in the U.S., the inverted food pyramid. Sorry, it's got grains at the bottom, and protein dense meats and fresh vegetables and healthy fats up near the top of the pyramid, fish and avocados and everything. But again, aside from the herbal sector, the wine, New Zealand agriculture was really on trend with what's going on in the world today. And we still have, you know, a bit of money. So, you know, that's really reassuring. Some of those things, they aren't bad. That new or deeper, like that's kind of reflecting existing consumer trends rather than shaping and leading consumer trends. And on top of that, we've got the weight loss drugs. The Ozempic patent in China expired in February. So that's about to get a lot more.
Just following that, how do you see if we don't make Nestle's targets of our reduction, you know, you say we're in a good position, grass-based system and things like that, how do you see if we don't achieve our 2030 targets, how would that impact us and what other opportunities are there around for New Zealand as a renewable energy, as you say, or focusing on greenhouse gases or
Yeah, so that's the scope 3 stuff you're talking about.
yeah.
So so they're asking New Zealand farmers, their suppliers in particular, to to reduce their emissions. So we're still doing really well on an emissions intensity. If we increase production, maybe our emissions intensity per kilo of solids produced is still really good, and I can't say whether it's improving or not off the top of my head, but we're in a really good competitive position. So if you're talking about Aotearoa, they're really trying to see when countries pointed at the world where it's, oh yeah, you want better milk, go find it somewhere else because you're not going to find it anywhere else. Their attitude is
The great question I have, which was how are sustainability expectations from overseas consumers changing and what impact does that have on the
yeah, I don't have a great answer to that one, but a lot of consumers do say that they want things, but also they want something that's affordable. So sometimes it's consumers that say they want and then that's not to say that change in the future. That's true, but for every product across the board. But we're still in a pretty good place for all of that as well.
What do you think drives that provenance in New Zealand with, say, our dairy and beef sectors? Is it the grass-fed piece? Is it able to provide a material at commoditized scale? Like we're in the nutritional business, exporting to consume the GLP-1 space, need nutrients that don't want to eat food anymore, or just wanting New Zealand material, grass-fed and finished. And do you think there's any more pieces other than just the grass-fed piece from New Zealand that is going to drive provenance deeper into bigger markets like US, EU?
Yeah, but I think the authenticity piece is pretty important. And your sector might be kind of one of the exceptions to the rule that I just laid out for for the larger land-based sectors in general. But
I think it's a big movement.
oh well, if someone's just shopping in the grocery store, they'll care about those things, but maybe it won't be top of mind. New Zealand's clean green image won't be top of mind. But for folks that are being a lot more discerning and exploring, feeding themselves, a better word, that is the case. We're focusing on that quality of the story rather than imported 2.7 million tons this year. Our New Zealand story is that being hidden in the New Zealand story and people aware of it? Is it something that is going to come back to bite us sometime in the future? That, to put it into context, the tonnage is more than the whole of all the grains and forages, conserved forages that we produce in New Zealand, transacted in New Zealand. So what would the problem be, Ivan? Is there a bad story behind that product, behind our products? That is why. I think it's widely known enough if you know where to look for it. And, you know, likewise, consider Spain. We're not perfect. Those countries are. The argument that PKE drives deforestation factually based, it's a byproduct from the industry, so it's maybe 1% of their of their revenues coming from PKE. So we ban it in Europe and everyone else ban it. They just set them on fire, dump it in the ocean or something. So there are drivers of deforestation that are bigger than that, which is why I'm using but yeah, there's always going to be things that threaten our image and the image and the reality of our so we're doing a job of staying ahead of the curve. It'd be the kind of the evergreen ones, right? Biosecurity. Big weather events, we've had reasonably. So yeah, 1 minute left, and yeah. Yes, yeah, so the protein density, healthy fats. Yeah, so one of the challenges with New Zealand is land use. There's not a lot of available headroom in terms of land or nutrients to further.
Can't hear anything.
Can't hear.
Any other questions?
It's very hard to hear.
Sorry.
So, I'm going to make you more insights and the questions for the weeks as well. I'd like to continue the dialogue as we move into the foyer for drinks and campaigns. The Vibe series, quite intentional, of staying to making connections, to reading faces, and I think this also needs conversations about future reflections on the past and we love the and I think the rich and that could be insights